The valley was quiet that morning, wrapped in a thin veil of mist. The trees stood still, listening to the slow hum of the wind that carried a strange unease. Deep inside that forest, among the moss and whispering leaves, walked a peculiar figure, a tall, upright wooden creature, shaped like a smooth log brought to life. His polished orange wood glowed softly under the early sunlight, and his large brown eyes wandered across the treetops with both wonder and worry. He had always loved this forest, its songs, its smells, its laughter of rustling leaves. Every morning he'd stroll past the old oak tree, watching the animals wake up. The chipmunks would chatter, the deer would bow gently before running off, and high above, a small bird family sang from a nest resting in the branches of a maple tree. It was his favorite sound, the chirping of tiny hatchlings, fragile and full of life. But that morning felt different. The clouds were heavy, hanging low like dark curtains waiting to fall. The wooden creature tilted his head, his thick, curved eyebrows knitting together. He could hear the forest whisper, a kind of warning only those made of nature could understand. The air grew thicker, damp with tension. Leaves trembled as a faint rumble echoed in the distance. A storm was coming. The creature looked up toward the nest. The mother bird fluttered anxiously, flying back and forth with bits of straw, trying to strengthen her fragile home before the storm arrived. He watched silently, his wooden chest tightening. He wanted to help, but how could a creature made of timber fight the wind itself? He reached out one of his long, thin wooden arms and touched the trunk of the maple tree. It was shaking slightly. His fingers brushed over the bark, feeling its pulse. He could feel the fear spreading through the forest. Animals retreating to burrows, the wind quickening its breath. He whispered softly, his wooden voice creaking like an old violin string. "Hold on, little ones. I'll watch over you." As the first cold drops of rain fell onto his smooth wooden head, he raised his gaze toward the darkening sky. Lightning flashed in the distance, bright and merciless. The forest groaned under the first roar of thunder. The wooden creature took a step forward, his large, cartoonish feet splashing in the growing puddles. He didn't know what he could do yet, but something inside his hollow chest burned with a strange courage. The birds above him were tiny, but their song had always filled his lonely days. Now it was his turn to protect them. He took shelter beneath the tree and waited, the storm's roar growing louder with every heartbeat. The wind began to twist through the branches like angry spirits, and the first crack of thunder echoed through the valley. The forest trembled. The rain poured harder, and the bird nest, so small and delicate, began to sway. The wooden creature's eyes widened in horror. He had no more time to think. He had to act. Now. The wind arrived like an army, wild, cold, and without mercy. It ripped through the trees, bending their branches and scattering leaves like frightened birds. The sky turned a violent grey, and thunder cracked so close that the forest seemed to shiver. The wooden creature stood motionless for a moment beneath the maple tree, his wooden arms shielding his face as rain poured down in sheets. Each drop struck his polished body like tiny hammers, echoing through his hollow chest. The sound of the storm was deafening. Wind, rain, thunder, and the cries of the forest blending into one terrifying symphony. He looked up. The bird nest was shaking violently, swinging on the thinnest branch at the very top of the tree. Inside it, the tiny hatchlings squeaked helplessly, their voices lost in the roar of the storm. Their mother circled above, fighting the wind, trying to reach them. But the air was too strong. She was tossed back again and again, the wooden creature's large brown eyes filled with fear. He could see one twig of the nest already break loose, dangling dangerously. One more gust, and the entire thing would fall. He stepped closer to the tree, placing one of his long, flat wooden hands against the trunk. The bark was slick with rain. Lightning flashed, white and blinding, and he could see the world in a frozen instant, the terrified birds, the trembling tree, the swirling chaos of leaves around him. He knew what he had to do. He had to climb. His skinny wooden legs dug into the muddy ground, and with slow, deliberate effort, he began to ascend the trunk. His fingers, long and jointed, grasped for any hold. The rain made it nearly impossible, but he pressed on. The wind tore at him, bending his thin limbs and slamming branches against his back. Each step felt heavier than the last, each movement a fight against nature itself. Halfway up, a bolt of lightning struck somewhere nearby. The sound exploded like the sky had cracked open. The shockwave nearly knocked him off the tree. He hugged the trunk tightly, his body trembling, droplets sliding down his carved face like tears. For a brief moment he thought of letting go, of giving up. But then he looked up again. He saw the nest, now barely holding on, and he saw the hatchlings, their tiny beaks open, calling out into the storm for help that might never come. That was enough. He forced himself upward again. His wooden fingers splintered slightly as he gripped a sharp branch, but he didn't stop. Pain meant nothing when those small lives were in danger. The world blurred around him. Wind, water, and thunder blending into a tunnel of determination. Finally, he reached the branch where the nest rested. It was shaking so violently that one of the baby birds nearly rolled to the edge. The wooden creature reached out both arms, his wooden joints creaking against the wind. Very carefully, he placed one large hand beneath the nest, steadying it. Easy. "Easy, little ones," he whispered, though his voice was nearly lost in the storm's roar. The mother bird flapped nearby, watching, her tiny body drenched and trembling. She seemed to understand. The creature clung to the tree with one arm while holding the nest with the other. The wind screamed louder, trying to tear it all away, but he refused to let go. He pressed his wooden back against the trunk, shielding the nest with his own body as branches snapped around him. Rain poured down his face. Lightning flashed across his wet surface, and still he held on. The forest could rage as much as it wanted. He wasn't moving, not until those tiny hearts were safe. The wind screamed through the forest like a living beast, tearing branches from trees and hurling them into the darkness. The sky was no longer grey, but an angry, boiling black. Lightning cracked in furious bursts, splitting the horizon into pieces of blinding white. The wooden creature clung to the maple tree with one arm, the other wrapped protectively around the trembling bird nest. Rain pounded his body in relentless sheets, streaming down the grooves of his polished surface. He could barely keep his footing. Every gust of wind tried to rip him away, to send him crashing to the ground far below. "Hold on," he whispered to the little ones, his wooden voice trembling like a creaking branch. "Please, just a little longer." But nature had no mercy that night. A deafening roar of thunder struck so close that it shook the entire forest. The tree shuddered beneath him. He felt the branch beneath his feet split slightly, a deep, cracking sound that froze his heart. His eyes darted downward. The trunk was bending. Another crack followed, sharp and final. The branch snapped. For one terrible second, the world went silent. And then everything fell. The wooden creature tumbled through the rain, the nest clutched tightly to his chest. Wind howled around him as he hit smaller branches on his way down. Each impact sent splinters flying off his limbs, small pieces of his wooden body breaking away. The forest floor rushed toward him in a blur of mud, water, and light. Then, impact, a deep, dull thud shook the ground. He lay still among the broken branches, motionless, his wooden body half buried in the mud. Rain fell hard, bouncing off his back. For a moment, there was no sound, only the hiss of falling water and the trembling of the tree that had given way. Slowly his fingers twitched. His arm lifted weakly. The bird nest, miraculously, was still cradled in his chest. He looked down at it. 3 tiny hatchlings alive, eyes wide with fear, but unhurt. He exhaled, a low wooden sigh that echoed like wind through an empty log. His body ached. Cracks ran across his arms. One of his legs was bent awkwardly, but none of that mattered. He had done it. They were safe. But the storm wasn't done yet. A strong gust tore through the clearing, rolling fallen branches and whipping mud into the air. He looked up. The tree he had climbed now leaned dangerously to one side. It was going to fall completely, and worse, the ground around him was flooding fast. Water was pooling at his feet, rising into small streams that carried away leaves and debris. The creature tried to stand, but his right leg gave way, splitting slightly under his own weight. He grimaced, pushing through the pain. With his good leg, he staggered forward through the mud, clutching the nest close to his chest. The mother bird swooped low, chirping desperately, guiding him toward a cluster of rocks higher up the hill. He followed her, step by step, every move heavy, slow, and painful. Lightning flashed again, illuminating his damaged form, soaked in rain, covered in mud, one arm chipped and cracked, but still moving forward. The hill seemed endless. His joints creaked, his wooden body groaned, but he didn't stop. Each time he faltered, the birds chirped faintly, reminding him why he couldn't give up. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reached the rocks. He set the nest carefully in a small, dry hollow beneath them, safe from the wind. The mother bird landed beside it, checking her young, chirping softly in relief. The wooden creature smiled weakly, a slow, tired curve of his wooden lips before collapsing beside the rocks. The rain continued to fall, washing the mud off his cracked surface. His eyes slowly dimmed, heavy with exhaustion. But even as the world around him roared in chaos, the nest stayed still, safe, protected, alive. Morning came slowly, as if the sun itself was afraid to look upon the wreckage left behind. The forest was silent now, not peaceful but heavy, the kind of silence that follows after something sacred has been broken. Mist rose from the drenched earth. The storm had passed, leaving behind shattered branches, flooded roots, and fallen trees. Birds that had survived chirped softly from a distance, their voices fragile and uncertain. The air smelled of rain and earth, a mixture of endings and beginning. Beneath a cluster of rocks, the small bird nest rested safely in a shallow hollow, dry and warm. The mother bird sat protectively over her hatchlings, her feathers puffed up to keep them from the cold. They were alive, all of them, tiny, trembling but alive, and beside them, half leaning against a stone, lay the wooden creature. His body was still and cracked, his orange sheen dulled by the storm's fury. Splinters marked his arms, his legs bent awkwardly. One of his eyes had a thin scratch across it, dulling the soft brown glow that once danced within. Rainwater dripped from his face, tracing lines that looked almost like tears. For a long while, he didn't move. Only the wind did, gently brushing through the trees, touching him as if to ask, "Are you still here?" Then slowly his fingers twitched. A faint creak echoed as his arm lifted from the mud. His head turned slightly, his wooden neck making a soft groan like a door opening for the first time in years. He blinked once, twice, then looked toward the nest. They were safe. A small, trembling smile formed on his carved mouth. His droopy eyes softened again, filled with tired warmth. He tried to sit up, but his leg gave a sharp crack, forcing him to stop. He rested back against the stone, his chest rising and falling slowly. Not with breath, but with something deeper, the pulse of the forest that lived within him. The mother bird noticed him. She fluttered over, landing gently on his shoulder. She chirped softly, tilting her head as if saying thank you. He blinked again, his large eyes following her movements. He smiled faintly. "You're welcome," he whispered, his voice rough and low, like the sound of wood brushing against wood. The bird hopped closer, nuzzling his cheek. The moment was small, almost invisible to the world, but in that quiet, broken forest, it felt like a miracle. He sat there for hours, motionless, watching sunlight slowly break through the grey clouds. Beams of gold fell across the wet ground, turning raindrops into diamonds. The forest began to breathe again. Frogs croaked, insects buzzed, leaves dripped rhythmically. Life was returning. The wooden creature tilted his head back, letting the warm sunlight touch his splintered surface. He could feel it, soft and healing. His cracks didn't close, but they didn't hurt as much either. The forest was mending, and somehow so was he. A soft breeze passed through the maple trees, now missing their strongest branch, the one he had fallen from. He looked at it for a long time, remembering the climb, the fall, the fear. And yet, as painful as it was, a strange peace filled him. He had done what he was meant to do. The mother bird returned to her nest, feeding her little ones. Their faint chirps filled the clearing once more, the same melody he had always loved. The wooden creature leaned back, closing his eyes. The sound of their tiny voices drifted through the morning air like hope reborn. And for the first time since the storm began, he felt calm. The next morning, sunlight poured gently through the trees, bright and clean after the storm's fury. The air smelled of wet bark, moss, and hope. Every leaf seemed to glisten, washed by the night's tears. The forest, once broken and bruised, was beginning to breathe again. The wooden creature still sat where the dawn had found him. His cracks were deep, his limbs heavy, but his heart, the quiet pulse of the forest within him, had grown stronger. For the first time since the fall, he could hear the rhythm of the woods again, a song of renewal, soft but steady. He lifted his head, his eyes catching the sunlight that danced through the branches. It warmed his wooden face, softening the splinters and filling the lines of his body with faint, golden reflections. He looked toward the bird nest. The mother bird was feeding her chicks, their tiny beaks opening one after another. The sight brought a smile to his wooden lips. But as he looked around, he saw what the storm had left behind. Fallen trees, broken branches, and uprooted saplings scattered across the ground. The forest that had once been his home now looked wounded. He felt a tug deep inside his hollow chest. The birds were safe, yes, but the home that sheltered them had suffered. Slowly, he placed his large hands against the earth and tried to stand. His joints creaked and groaned. One of his legs was still cracked from the fall. For a moment, he nearly collapsed again, but he dug his wooden toes into the muddy soil, using the strength of the ground itself to lift him upright. It was not graceful, but it was enough. He stood tall again, scarred, bent, but standing. The mother bird chirped loudly, almost encouragingly, before flying up to a nearby branch. She seemed to know what he intended. The wooden creature began to move through the clearing, his large cartoonish feet squelching in the mud. He picked up fallen branches, planting them upright like markers of hope. He gathered smaller twigs and leaves to create makeshift shelters for animals whose homes had been destroyed. He even used parts of his own broken splinters as stakes to hold things in place. Every motion was slow, deliberate, and full of care. The forest, in return, seemed to help him. The wind calmed. The sun stayed warm. Even the broken trees leaned slightly toward him, as though recognizing one of their own. Hours passed. By midday the clearing had changed. The fallen branches had been cleared. Small nests were tucked safely under overhangs. The flooded soil had been channeled into tiny streams that glistened like ribbons of silver. It was far from perfect, but it was life again. When he finished, he stepped back, his long arms hanging loosely by his sides. The sunlight reflected off his worn, cracked surface, turning him into something more than he had ever been before. Not just a part of the forest, but its guardian. The mother bird fluttered down again, landing near his foot. She chirped once, twice, then lifted a small piece of straw in her beak and dropped it at his toes. A gift. He bent down, picking it up gently between his wooden fingers. He didn't need to speak. The meaning was clear. She trusted him. He looked up toward the sky. The last of the storm clouds drifted away, revealing a bright blue stretching endlessly above. For a moment, he simply stood there, his slouched figure framed against the golden light, the wind brushing softly across his cracked body. He had been through the storm, through pain and fear, but now, in the quiet after everything, he had found something new, purpose. Days passed. The forest, once broken and drowned in silence, began to sing again. Morning light spilled gently through the canopy, painting the ground in gold. Tiny streams trickled where floodwaters had once raged. Shoots of new grass pushed through the mud. The scent of life returned, green, fresh, eternal. And in the center of it all stood the wooden creature. He was different now. His surface, once smooth and polished, was covered in small cracks and scars, each one a story. The storm had changed him, but it had also given him something deeper than beauty, purpose. He moved slowly through the forest each day, checking the places he had rebuilt. When a branch fell, he lifted it. When the wind grew too strong, he shielded the nests. When an animal was lost, he guided it home. The birds no longer feared him. They sang for him. The deer walked beside him. Even the smallest creatures, the frogs, the mice, the insects, followed his movements with quiet trust. He was no longer just a strange wooden being in the woods. He had become part of its rhythm. One morning, as the sun rose higher than usual, the mother bird, the one whose nest he had saved, flew down and landed on his shoulder. Her little ones, now grown and strong, circled above, filling the air with song. The wooden creature smiled, his droopy eyes soft and warm. "You've grown," he whispered gently. His voice creaked, but it carried kindness, like an old melody remembered after years of silence. He looked around, at the trees swaying in the breeze, the sunlight glimmering on the river, the echoes of life that now filled every space. The storm had once tried to break this place, but now it was stronger than ever. He placed one hand on the trunk of the maple tree, the same one he had climbed to save the nest. Its bark was scarred, yet green shoots were sprouting along its branches. Life always found a way. As his fingers brushed the trunk, something began to change. His wooden surface shimmered faintly in the sunlight. The cracks in his body filled with golden light, soft and pulsing like the heartbeat of the forest itself. He looked down at his hands, surprised, but not afraid. He could feel the earth's energy moving through him, slow, ancient, and kind. The trees around him seemed to lean closer, whispering in the language of leaves. He understood. The forest was thanking him. It was welcoming him, not as a visitor, but as one of its own. He stepped back, feeling warmth spread through his limbs, His feet sank slightly into the earth, merging with the roots below. The light around him grew stronger, wrapping him in a gentle glow. The mother bird chirped one last time, watching as her wooden savior slowly became still. He wasn't dying. He was returning to where he had always belonged. The light faded, and there, in the heart of the forest, a new tree stood, tall, strong, and golden brown like the morning sun. Its bark bore faint lines of a smiling face. Its branches curved protectively above a cluster of bird nests. The mother bird and her family perched among the leaves, singing softly. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying his voice, gentle, kind, eternal. "I'll always be here." The forest listened, and somewhere in that golden silence, the wooden creature's heart, now part of the earth itself, continued to beat with the rhythm of life. He was no longer just a log. He was the guardian of the forest,